Welcome, friends and comrades, to another interview segment hosted by the Midwestern Marx Institute for Marxist Theory and Political Analysis. Today we'll be speaking about the situation in Peru with Sebastián León, a philosophy teacher at the Pontifical Catholic University of Peru. We will get started right after this.
Cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.
Thank you so much for coming on, brother. How are you doing?
Fine. Thank you for having me, Carlos. It's very good to see you again.
Likewise. Before we start with this new wave of protests, I think it'd be good to set the background up a little bit for the audience. So can you tell us a bit about the development of the coup against Castillo and his eventual imprisonment that started last year? Can you give us that background first before we dive into the current events?
Of course. Okay. So I guess, to be precise, it's kind of funny and paradoxical, but the coup against Castillo is actually something that precedes the Castillo going into the government, because since the elections, since Castillo was since it was already clear that he was winning. I don't know if you remember this. The conservatives and the right-wing parties and many elements of the bourgeoisie or its lawyers and whatever, they try to, how do you say this? They actually try to cancel a new, the votes of many of Castillo's voters outside of Lima. As you know, Castillo's majority was outside of Lima, in the regions. So especially in the south, in the Andean region of Peru. So from the very first day before, and before going into the government, they tried to sabotage and they tried to took down Castillo. So after they quit trying to cancel the votes that let Castillo win, after they stopped denouncing that there was a fraud, which was part of what they were doing, they started to antagonize him from Congress. As you may know, as you may remember, even though Castillo won the presidency, Congress was mostly, it had a right-wing majority. You have a small number of liberals, and by liberals I mean like more progressive, kind of woke liberal, but mostly they were very conservative liberals, or almost, I won't say fascist, but fascistic, like Fujimorismo, right? So the Congress was very antagonizing, in its approach to Castillo's government from day one. That they didn't want to get into some sort of agreement, even though Castillo was always trying to get some kind of truce from them, because Castillo, and this is something I think we talked about this last time I was in here. Castillo is not a Marxist. He's not a socialist. He's actually a union leader, and a very pragmatic union leader. What Castillo has is a class extraction. He's a man. He's not from Lima. He's not of European descent. He's not white. He's a peasant. He's very close to peasant organizations and working class organizations and indigenous movements. He has that, and he negotiated. He made alliances with those groups. He made alliances with the left, with Peru Libre, and then also with Nuevo Peru, with what we could call the institutional left in its two main forms. No, these two organizations, Peru Libre and Nuevo Peru, no, and some smaller ones, and that's what got him into the government. But he was never a Marxist, even though he kind of represented could I say this, like an alternative that proposed important structural changes. So even though this was the case, he was very willing to get some kind of truce from the right. He was trying to negotiate his way out of this kind of antagonizing, and he was very willing to talk. Even I would say too willing. No, some of us in the left, we weren't very happy with this. But anyway, the crucial thing is that even though Castillo had this disposition that too diplomatic for his own good, they didn't want to talk with him, and they didn't want to get into some kind of agreement with him. They wanted him out from the beginning. Now, there you can see the peculiar way that class and race articulate in Peru. They didn't want non-white, non-westernized, in any case, a person that didn't came from their own, how would I say, from the ranks, from the class ranks, or who didn't have the credentials, the academic, institutional credentials, the bourgeoisie and its representatives usually considered. So they wanted him out from the beginning. So in the end, even though he receded with some of his most radical, the most radical points of his agenda, they always tried to sabotage him. So I would say this was like I don't know, the whole 2 years of this government was Castillo trying to find a way to applicate his opposition, find a way to save some small portion of his radical program of change and applicate the opposition, as I said, and the opposition always never taking enough from him, always trying to look for any chance to use the mechanism what we call the vacancia, right? This mechanism that Congress can use and has been used many times in the last years to depose the president. So the other thing that is important to take into account is that Congress wasn't alone. Congress had, as I have insinuated, Congress was backed by the bourgeoisie, was backed by the media, was backed by the Tribunal of Justice, was backed by a lot of institutions in the state and outside of the state. And they opened a lot of investigations surrounding Castillo's closer associates, Castillo's family, they actually persecuted very closely his family. So they were looking for any sort of ambiguous information that could be used in the media to sort of paint Castillo as a corrupt person and a crook and whatever. And in the end, with all the resources of the bourgeoisie at the disposition of Congress and of the Tribunal of Justice, Castillo was very, 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 how would I say this,
Vulnerable.
vulnerable. He was cornered, in the executive. I mean, it's really curious because Castillo won the elections, right? He was a president. He had his cabinet. The ministers, at least at first, were from the left. Sometimes he had to negotiate, and especially in economy, he didn't always have a chance to get someone from the left. But he had no real power in many ways. For example, he never controlled the armed forces or the police. The police used to repress many times Castillo's followers, even though he was the president. So you had this very strange situation that we hadn't seen before. That the fact that the president is openly antagonized not only by Congress but also by, for example, the police force. So in the end, for Castillo, it was almost certain that it was a matter of time before he was couped. So, or how would I say this? Vacated from government. So he did what at the moment was really a surprise for us, because we all thought that even though you had these like programs and all of the media, and I must correct myself, all of the media in Lima, but it's very important. The press from Lima it has a lot of power, much more power than the press from the other parts of the country. So the Limean press, even though they had in all of the channels and in all of the programs these presentations of Castillo and trying to connect him with corruption and everything, we thought, well, they don't have like tangible evidence that connect him. They have a lot of gossip and they have a lot of ambiguous information, but we thought that he could resist. But I mean, we don't know what happens behind, right? So the thing is that he was certain that he was going to be out very soon. So he decided to announce that he was closing the Congress, which is something that actually started as a popular demand, because in the last few years, we have, from 2016 to the present, we have had like 7 presidents, because we have this mechanism of the vacancy used more and more and more and reinterpreted in ways that make very much easier for the government, for the Congress to oust the president. So the population, which the Congress is not very popular in Peru. Not even, I would say, not even in the middle class, or even some groups of the bourgeoisie, because
Well, it's got a 90% disapproval rating. That was one of the statistics
no,
we're going to talk about later
it's
on.
brutal. It's brutal.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know. In the case of popular classes, the working class, the peasantry, you have it's like it's a matter of indignation toward the abuses of the Congress. I would say that in the middle class and in the progressive, if you could call it like that, the progressive portion of the bourgeoisie, you have it's almost a matter of taste. They do prefer the Congress to Castillo, but they found that the Congress is like a tasteless thing. So it's more like, ironically, also a class thing. But whatever. The thing is that in the end, the people demanded from Castillo that he close the Congress. I wouldn't say all of the population, of course, but the mobilized population, especially outside of Lima. When I talk about the people, almost always I'm talking of people outside of Lima, right? demanded from him, or expected from him, not only that he got more aggressive, but also or showed some kind of strength, but many of them actually expected that he closed the Congress, right? So in the end, after many months, we could say that Castillo wasn't very quick with his political reflexes. So in the end, after many months, he appeared on television and he said, "Well, I'm going to close the Congress," and and there's a lot of debate if he expected, if what happened later, if he knew that they were going to get him, if he knew that he actually didn't have the strength to do this, because as I already said, the police, the armed forces, they weren't with him. It said that they actually sat with him and they told him that they were going to support him, and of course it wasn't true. We don't know. The thing is, no, that's why we were so surprised when he did this, right? But the thing is, after Castillo did this, he took his family to the embassy of Mexico, and it said that he was going back to the palace, and he was took by his own guard, his own scold or whatever. So that's kind of what happened. And after he was took by the police, the Congress declared that he was involved in an act of treason, and so he wasn't morally capable of continuing as president, and they vacated him. And there are all sorts of irregularities in that vacancy, because it's not just that they took this as an opportunity to do this by from a formalist point of view, respecting the Constitution, which is usually what liberals from a more progressive or woke extraction, they are actually really formalists, and their argument is that Castillo made a coup, according to them, exactly as Fujimori in '92. So he couldn't be a president anymore because he's exactly like Fujimori, and blah blah blah. So, but the thing is, they can't even say that because they didn't even have enough votes to out him. They just did this, like this kind of theater, where they declared that he was, I don't know, morally incapable and stuff. So in the end, that's how Dina Boluarte gets into power, and because she was a vice president, she was Castillo's vice president. Many people, I include myself here, didn't like Boluarte for many reasons, but in the end, the reason she's rejected is because it was there was an agreement between Castillo and his his closer associates, like, for example, Betsy Chavez, who right now is in prison, and Professor Aníbal Torres, who was his right hand man, and Boluarte. There was an agreement that if Castillo was coup, Boluarte would quit. She would renounce to it. But she didn't. She made a pact with the right. And after that, and after she appeared in open television as the new president of the republic, people got into the streets. They got into the streets, and they actually demanded from the beginning that Castillo was reinstated in his office. And they demanded, of course, that Boluarte should respect the agreement she had with the president, and that she quit the office. But she didn't, and from the beginning, Boluarte has said that her hands are tied, that she can't quit even if she wanted, that she has already tried to move a law for getting early elections to Congress, and Congress has rejected it. That she no, there's also this demand of closing the Congress. It's still out there. She says that she can do that because the Constitution doesn't allow her. Also, the Congress has passed many obscene laws. Among them, they have restricted the power of the executive to close Congress. It's much more difficult now than before. But whatever, she's trying to use that as an excuse to remain in power. So there's this situation where you had the president and his cabinet in one side with Castillo, and Congress on the other side, and it was almost the state divided as an open expression of class struggle, because that's what you had. That has disappeared with Boluarte. All of the apparatus of the state have got into the hands of the bourgeoisie and its representatives. No, they own all of the state now. No? So I don't know if that kind of clears the if,
It does. That's a very good background. And just to tease out a little bit more, you kind of started getting at this, but the coup government of Boluarte was extremely unpopular from basically day one. Um, can you give us, just so that it better serves the comparative standpoint of the new protest, but can you give us
okay.
some of what the demands were in the first wave of protests? Why did they eventually stop? And just so that the viewers have an idea, an estimated 70 people were massacred by the police in these. So can you sort of
Okay.
flesh out a little bit the forms of repression that were done by
Yeah.
not just the police, but the coup government in general?
Okay. Right. There's one very important thing that I should mention, actually, that kind of I forgot to mention it before, and it's really, really important. It's the role of the left. Okay, because I think many people would actually want to know what's the left doing, or what it did in this scenario, right? Because, as I said, Castillo is not. I mean, he's kind of leftish, but he's not a socialist and whatever, and he's more of a leader from the what we call civil society, right? He's not politicized, ideologically. No, he hasn't that consistent ideological line. He has this um, like this lax, right? But he had this at the beginning, at his side, two big left organizations, right? Peru Libre, which defines itself as Marxist-Leninist and Mariateguist, right? And Nuevo Peru, which is much more eclectic and mixed. It has some socialists and Marxists, and also some social democrats, and I don't know, maybe it even has anarchists. I don't know. And Peru Libre is more of a regional organization, much closer to the working class and peasantry. And I would say its leaders are like a petit bourgeoisie, but regional, which in Peru means a lot, right? Because if you're not Limian and if you're not white, it's almost like a different class, right? Or a class so segmented that actually it has its own in its own way. It's suppressed by the white Limian, right? Bourgeoisie or petit bourgeoisie in this case, right?
Well,
And you also have
you could say sort of in line with Lasordo and class struggle,
exactly.
is race taking the form of class struggle.
It's class struggle, yeah. Right, and in No Peru, it's more like they have a base, a working class base. They do have representation in the working class, but I would say less than No Peru, like a smaller segment, and I would say an older segment, which has, because No Peru has ties with older organizations, right? including Patria Roja, for example, right, which is the Communist Party, or one of the two Communist parties right now, right, the most popular, the one who has ties with China, whatever. And also, but most of its base, political base, I would say, is middle class, like what you guys call woke in the US, and many old in the higher echelons, you have like many older leftists who were very active and even very radical in the 70s, but they were from, I would say, higher class extraction, like bourgeois. Maybe they were members of the bourgeoisie, many of them, right? Like the radicalized sons and daughters of these older families of Peru, and many very very consequent back in the 70s. But right now they are older and they have retired, and they have very much disconnected from popular classes. So why am I mentioning that? Because both parties played a very, 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 I would say, I don't know, like noxious role in all of this, right? They actually, each in their own way and in different times, demanded from Castillo that he took members of the organization into the cabinet. And you had these moments when at first he had members of both organizations in the cabinet, but then he kind of Castillo never trusted nor Perú Libre, nor Peru, nor Vladimir Serrón, nor Verónica Mendoza. No, he never did. So he kind of got into an agreement with Mendoza and her people. So he took out Peru Libre's people from the cabinet, and then Peru Libre antagonized Castillo. They became opposition, until Castillo got again members of Peru Libre into the cabinet, and then he took out members of Peru and Mendoza's people, and then Mendoza and her people saw Castillo as a traitor, and they threatened him to become opposition, and that was kind of the role that both of these political left-wing or supposedly left-wing organizations have played through the government, through Castillo's government. So they both are very discredited with people right now. The left, I mean, it's been shameful. They have been really, the role has been really, really, really shameful. So why do I mention this? Because even now, I mean, they actually voted in favor of, most of them, of ousting Castillo of office. No, Peru, and Peru Libre right now are part of the government. They have the mesa directiva, the directive table of the Congress. But whatever, I'm going into the question. The first wave of protests have these demands that I already mentioned, even though I didn't articulated them. Right? They demand that Castillo is reinstated. They demand of course, the Constituent Assembly, which was I would say, the pillar of Castillo as a candidate, and of Peru Libre as his platform, because Castillo got into the presidency with Peru Libre, right? They demand that the Congress is closed, and they also demand that Boluarte quits, right? That she gets out of the presidency. No, which goes hand in hand with the one Castillo again in the presidency, right? But I wouldn't say that the demand to get Castillo reinstalled in the presidency was universal, but it was a popular demand. It was, I would say that you had a big sector, in outside of Lima, especially in popular classes, that wanted Castillo as president again, who still, even though Castillo backed down many times, even though Castillo failed them in many ways, even though Castillo was trying to, well, he kind of tried to get into an agreement so he could, you know, so he could govern without this strong, visceral antagonizing by the Congress. Even in spite of all of this, they still saw Castillo as one of them. And that's really important. That's really important because it's too easy. And both of these parties, in different situations, when they didn't have people in their cabinet, they kind of do this thing that they said, no, Castillo is a traitor, and he's not a real socialist, and he's not a Marxist, and he has betrayed the people and whatever. And that's so easy to say. I mean, like, and this kind of ultra vanguardist thing, because the people always, they kept seeing Castillo as one of their own, as a man that sat with them and negotiated with them and get into agreements with them, and as the man that they put into the presidency, that the first time a peasant, and someone who didn't have these credentials of the bourgeoisie was put by them into the presidency. So they still, I mean, it's huge because even though Castillo failed in many ways, and he, of course, is not the ideal leader. It's clear to all of us that he's not. But in spite of all of this, when Castillo was president from day one until they ousted him, popular organizations could go into the government palace and talk with the president, just as the heads of huge enterprises and the leaders of the bourgeoisie have always got into the palace. It was the first time since Velasco Alvarado back in the 70s, right? When people could actually do this and be heard and talk with the president and talk with his cabinet, right? And it was the first time in, I wouldn't say that there was never repression in the government. Of course, that's a lie. That would be a lie. But it was, I mean, since I'm alive, at least, it's the less repression we have ever had. And the most willing government, I would say, to go to talk with the people and to get a peaceful agreement. The government has had that will, and we have to recognize. I was very unhappy with Castillo for most of his government, but that's what I'm saying right now in the present context. It weighs a lot, much more than before. So the thing is, there was this popular demand that I would say was ever growing, that Castillo was reincorporated into the government. And even though, especially in Nuevo Peru, with Mendoza's group, right, the woke group, when they were in the streets, and they were, I would say, they took their time to get into the streets. Peru Libre too, but Mendoza was more, at the beginning, she even supported Boluarte. They said, like, we can do anything. Castillo has destroyed himself. It's his fault. He was a traitor. So whatever. So we had to support the government, right? And even after the first deaths, I would say, there's right now in Twitter there's this communication of Mendoza of December 13. Boluarte got into the government on 17. This is after the first killings. From the police repression and military repression because of the first wave of protests. And even then she was kind of, no, we have to support Boluarte. We have to try with Boluarte to get a solution. And after she decided to support the protests and I don't know, like not supporting Boluarte anymore. Even after that group of the left tried to, I would say, they tried to silence the demand of reinstating Castillo. They tried to sell this other demand of new elections, which is insane because right now with Castillo in prison, we have no leftist leader right now. That there's no one in the left that could assume government. Of course, I don't know. Maybe Mendoza thinks that she would win, but she wouldn't. Right now, the funny thing is that um, the polls, right? The polls say that the only person that would have a majority of the vote right now, if he presented himself as a candidate, would be Castillo. So he would win again. So I don't know. In the these were the demands, and it was a very long wave of protests. It was like 3 months or so.
Can I stop you right there real quick, just
Yeah.
because I think it's very interesting. The point that you're bringing up seems to be an interesting contradiction that develops in Castillo's government between him and the sort of leftist forces that ended up backing him, whether it's the uh, uh, New Peru or Peru Libre. And I don't know if it's just being in the West and the global North, like the only sources that we were getting from Peru, it's either like the very clearly
Yeah.
pro-imperialist bourgeois sources, or like Patria Roja and the Communist Party stuff and the Peru
I
Libre
know.
stuff. And it seemed for us like, okay, these compromises, there's a lot of tension and everyone is out to get them, but these compromises, it's gotten, I know I felt like this for a while, it's gotten to a point where the only way to describe this is as him selling out, right? And you seem to be painting a narrative that it's a little bit more complex than that, and he still had the people on his side, and he was still doing things that
Yeah.
represented a qualitative shift from like everything that we've had before.
Yeah.
And instead of like desiring some pure idea of how he should have governed, as if he didn't have a tremendous opposition in the right-wing Congress, the left should have been more realistic about his limitations and the way that he was trying to maneuver through tremendous tension. Is that correct?
I would say that to a certain degree, yes, it is true. I would say again that to me, and I mean to everyone, I think, or to most people, Castillo wasn't an ideal leader. He's not. I mean, who is an ideal leader, right? But he has a lot of deficiencies as a leader. But the thing is, I mean, I consider myself a Leninist, right? And in Leninism, you have this notion that actually is actually seen as a presupposition of a socialist revolution, what the Third International called the democratic revolution, right? And you of course you have the traditional democratic revolutions in Europe and the US and whatever, and it's this bourgeois liberal thing, right? But in the Third International, you had the point of view that the democratic revolution in what we right now we call the global South, I prefer third world, no? Right? New democracy, says the chat, and yeah, Mao's new democracy, right? It's the position that this anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist, democratic revolution in colonial and post-colonial regions of the globe actually were articulated themselves with the global struggle for socialism. It was a debilitating strike to the bourgeoisie and capital in the globe. So to build socialism in these post-colonial and colonial regions of the globe, you actually had to gain, first of all, national sovereignty, first of all, build some kind of institution or I don't know, I know institutions in plural that could articulate the will of the nation in some way. Of course, it's a complex process. You have class struggle. You still have a bourgeoisie, a national bourgeoisie. Some of them may be patriotic. Some of them, most of them won't. The same with the petit bourgeoisie, whatever. Each country has its specificities. Some of them has a huge peasantry, some of them not. I don't know. The thing is, I came to see, and I think I said this in the last interview we had with you, that I saw Castillo's process as a democratic revolution. This is what it is, right? Because you have this kind of course, it's not the same, but it's a kind of apartheid in Andean countries is what you have in Bolivia and Peru, right? Even though, of course, now you have universal suffrage and whatever, but it's still, there are many. In Spanish, we call it dique, right? Like a dam, right? Like some sort of institutional dams that prevented, right, the people to actually put one of their own in government or in ministers or anyway. And this change, of course, is a difficult change, right? It's a change with a lot of comes and goes and whatever, and of course there will be like how would I call it, like retrocesos, like when you go backwards.
Retreats, step.
Retreats, of course
Yeah.
of course you will have retreats, and of course you will have, it's not an ideal landscape. Most of the popular classes in the peasantry and the working class, they don't have I don't know, technicians with all of this knowledge that is required in the state, and this is seen as a deficiency by many people in the middle class and whatever. But it's something that has to be built. That's something that Lenny understood very well. That yeah, you have to, of course, use the technicians that you have. Most of them won't be radicals or socialists, but you have to use them in some way. You have to, but you also need, and that's something that Deng Xiaoping understood very well. You also need to extract the knowledge from them, right? And that's a difficult, long process. Of course, there you see the limitations of, again, of liberal democracy, and the fact that even though Castillo won the elections and got into the presidency, it was very easy to get him out, right? That's another part of this task, right, of building a democracy that is actually representative to this excluded population in countries like my own. So yeah, I would see it that way. I think that the left didn't understood that, and even for many of them, they talk about now that Castillo wasn't a Marxist and whatever. Yeah, but what are they? What is this left doing right now? They are Peru Libre right now is allying in itself with with Fujimoristas. No, they have, as I said before, they have took the leadership of the Congress. No, they are very fine with Boluarte as long as Boluarte and the Congress give them something. And I would say that the only reason why Nuevo Peru is not that good with the government right now is because they have like two people in the Congress. So that's the only reason why I mean, without Castillo and somebody in the government that could give them ministries, no, they can have them. So they are better right now in the position of moral indignation. But opportunism has run rampant in both sectors of the institutional left. If some kind of actual leftist organization or left wing movement, if there can be some kind of left that is actually articulated with the people, it's the organizations that are in the street and the organization right now protesting with them, and the organizations that are talking with them and coming into agreements with the leaders. But I mean, right now there's the funny thing with the left here, with the institutional left here, Peru Libre, no Peru, they hate each other. They hate each other. I mean, Peru Libre even explicitly says that for them, they prefer the right than this woke left, no, party, right? They say that for them, they have, Serron has said this, that for him the biggest contradiction, no, from Mao, the Maoist conception of contradiction, the biggest contradiction is what we call la caviares. The caviares are the wogs, right? Or
Mm.
some way. So for him, that's even worse. And it's really funny because they kind of try to present this class struggle between the Peru Libre and Nuevo Peru and whatever. And I would say that's not right at all, because that's an idealist perspective, right? Like a moral perspective, like conservative values against progressive values. That's absurd.
Mm.
The right criteria is class struggle, and the right no the I think the better conception of a contradiction right now inside the left is a contradiction between the institutional left, woke or conservative or whatever, and the left, whatever left remains in the street with the people. That's a contradiction we have right now in the left, not among caviares
It's so
and
interesting
freedom
to
and
see it's so interesting to see the homologies there with the U.S. And the way that segments of the left in both extremes end up participating in what's often called this culture war, and seeing their primary targets as like the woke parts of the left, or the woke parts of the working class, or the conservative ones, without realizing that the form that conflict takes is something that sets us back a bunch of steps. And um, but it's there are these tensions that exist, and they can't be ignored, between the middle class left, the caviar left. Sometimes we have our comrades from RBN, they call them the boutique left, and there's a bunch of terms for it, and
I
the
mean,
more popular left, right?
of course, you have class differences, right?
Right.
And you have, as I said, Peru Libre, the leaders are regional, not Limian. In Nuevo Peru, in Nuevo Peru, you have people that are not from Lima, but I mean, Limian. It's a kind of ambiguous term that I use because it could be extraction from Lima, but it can also be white and have studied in Lima, not necessarily born in Lima, or
Mm.
connections with Limean elites. It's ambiguous, but I mean, of course, you have these differences, and of course, like progressive, woke or whatever, that kind of morals is mostly associated with. I would say like more privileged, people inside the working class or inside the middle class or whatever. Of course, yeah. And conservative values is more of a, yeah. You have this class antagonism. They exist, of course, they exist. But
But
I
it's not
mean,
principle, right?
yeah, and of course, and you, if you have to make an alliance, do you really prefer to make an alliance with Fujimorismo, who hate everything you are because they are the closest thing to a fascist organization in this country right now? Do you really want to ally themselves, with them, and not with the other sector of the left, when you are supposedly you are both for the Constituent Assembly, and you are both supposedly for a new constitution, and you are supposedly, I don't know, you are both claiming to represent the people, right? It's like they are no, they are not able to see that this idea, this Maoist, not Maoist, but Mao's idea of the contradictions inside in the
Within the people.
yeah,
Yeah.
within the contradictions within the people, that doesn't exist. They don't
Mm.
see the idea of a or left-wing organization as something that yeah, it has contradictions with it, but you have to deal with that, and you have to actually recognize the enemy. They have
And they're
lost all,
secondary.
yeah,
They're
exactly,
secondary
right
contradictions.
now.
They're not principal
Yeah,
contradictions.
right now they're secondary. They may become after, I don't know, at some point they may become, they may get in at the center of the stage, but not right now. It's clear to me that
Mhm.
they are not right now. And another thing that I wanted to very, very briefly mention is that this thing you said, that of course, outside of Peru it's easier to get information from the institutional left. Of
Right.
course, of course, because they have the channels of communication, they have the contacts, right? Patria Roja, which is or was allied with Nuevo Peru, they made this coalition Juntos por el Perú, which is the one that
Mm.
Mendoza presided and got people into the Congress. And well, Patria Roja, which opposed Patria Roja hates Castillo. They hate him, and they only supported him in the end, right? A few weeks before getting into the elections with Fujimori, and after immediately after he won, they were opposition. Patria Roja hates Castillo, and that's because they have, the rivalries are union rivalries. Castillo's union is opposed to the old leadership of the teachers union, this union that has kind of, I would say, become what in English this would be like the how Lenin talked about this working class aristocracy, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and yeah, the leadership of the teachers union, the SUTEP, which is very close to Patria Roja, has become some sort of working class aristocracy, and is very close. It has been very close with all of the liberal governments we have had in these years, and they are very, I don't know, they are very fine with liberal democracy right now, even though they, of course, they have a Marxist discourse and whatever. Well, they have a context with China, for example. They come and go to China all the time, and they're invited by communist parties all around Latin America and the rest of the world, and they have money, of course. And no, Peru, they have the contacts in academia and and NGOs and Jacobin, of course. Marxist Leninists, we tend to we don't like Jacobin very much, but there was this kind of a strange phenomenon because we had Latin American, no, like Jacobin Latin America, something like that,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And with Jacobin Latin America, they kind of forgot all of that. Like, they were like, no, they're different because they interviewed Álvaro García Linera, so they must be fine,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
But all of the contacts to write in Jacobin Latin America was through Nuevo Peru. A friend of mine who is a very consequent Marxist, but he's also an academic. They actually invited him to write a piece for the magazine, and he did. But he criticized Mendoza, and they wrote to him, and they said something like, "No, we are very close to Mendoza. So we politely ask you to change this. No? So you shouldn't criticize her." So yeah, they have all of the contacts, and they have all of the networks. So yeah, it's very much easier. And of course, you have some power inside the international left if you are called the Communist Party.
right.
And it has a ring to it. And even here, many young people still get into Patria Roja. Why? Because they are the Communist Party. Where else, right? So yeah, this is that's the thing, right? It always comes to the same, right? That if you are not close to the people, it's very difficult to know where to go.
And
Uh,
that's very interesting that you mentioned them being rooted in the old unions that have developed a form of labor aristocracy, because that's as Lenin shows, the sort of soil out of where this right opportunism ends up developing. And I think we're seeing a lot of that at play. And when you were talking about like the role that Castillo plays, you described it as a form of new democracy movement. What comes to mind in terms of possible analogy for U.S. events, it's like the political revolution represented by the civil rights movement, right? As a sort of third American revolution.
mhm.
And you had a similar phenomenon there where all the Trotskyites were like, this guy's just a reformist or whatever.
Yeah.
He's sold out to the bourgeoisie. He's not radical enough, and he was the guy that was most jailed and that was most deeply attacked by literally everyone. But
Mm.
he's not good enough. We have to go through another route. But that came to mind there when you were speaking about how the institutional left was treating Castillo, and just like Castillo, King had a large number of the people on his side, specifically the black proletariat, um, which represented in a similar way, I think, as the Andes region and the sort of peasant communities and the indigenous in Peru, a sort of underclass that hasn't won the sort of full status of citizenship that a political revolution would have been able to bring about. Um, but sort of to switch gears into the current wave of protest, the disapproval rating of Boluarte, as we were talking about earlier, has risen to around 82%, and that of the right wing Congress to 90.4%, which is insane. I thought that the U.S. Congress was up there, but oh man.
We have
Um,
pretty serious competition in Peru. Yeah.
so, what has prompted the Peruvian people to hit the streets once again in what's being called the third takeover of Lima? And what are the demands made this time around? How do they compare to the previous ones?
Yeah. Okay. So the thing is, to be precise, even though I also talked about waves, right? But to be precise, the protests, they never stopped. They kind of diminished in strength and visibility, but they never actually stopped, right? Outside of Lima. All right, like you had small protests in plazas in Cusco, for example, which is another big city, but most like, I don't know. It's kind of funny the kind of centralization you have in Peru, because I would say at least 50% of the population is in Lima, right? So Lima is significant, but for many reasons, not only cultural, hegemonic reasons, but also because of that demographic factor. You need Lima to mobilize, even though it is like this pit of fascistic tendencies and racism and the roots of all colonial powers. They are all in Lima. Of course, that's a simplification. You have a proletariat in Lima too. You have a working class. There has been a lot of migration in the last few decades. Of course, Castillo has voters in Lima, but they are a minority, right? So that's also why it's called the take of Lima. And many people in the left, especially in Nuevo Peru, they were very I don't know, like self-conscious about this thing of the take of Lima. They were like tweeting that it shouldn't be called the take of Lima. Why are they taking Lima? This is not the Bastille, and it's so obvious. It's so obvious that it's a class thing. The fact that they can't understand why it's called the take of Lima, they are even offended by it, right? But the thing is, they needed to actually reactivate the movement in Lima, and for that, I mean, the why these previous takes died out, because of course they were like, it was like 3 months. People has to eat. People has to go back to their jobs. They couldn't stay there forever. They didn't, and this is crucial to understand the political map in Peru. They didn't trust organizations. They didn't trust good intention, good-willed Limian people. They didn't, right? I mean, of course, not all they do have contacts and they do have networks, but it's difficult to actually build ties between Limian progressives, and I'm not using progressive as in woke. I'm using progressive as in people who legitimately compromise with like a real left-wing popular ideology, right? It's hard to make those ties, and of course, Nuevo Peru does a lot, or organizations like Nuevo Peru do a lot to like erode trust, right? And I would say right now this has happened with the left in general because of the performances of Perú Libre and Nuevo Peru, right? So well, the protest died out in Lima, and I would say there has been an as like a slow burn thing, right? Like they have been building up these few months. They have been like small but constant, at and they have eventually like exploded again, right? And we always knew, or I don't know, at least many of us knew that they would explode again because the organizations said it from the beginning, right? This is like a pause, but we will start again, or we will go to Lima again. So the organizations in the regions have got into agreements, and they have decided to send delegations to Lima. Now, the demands of these protests are the same 4 points I've already mentioned. Like, Boluarte has to quit, Castillo has to be reinstated into the presidency. We the government the Congress has to be closed, and a constituent assembly. That again, I must say that Castillo's point wasn't at first universal. I would say it was majoritarian, but not universal. There was a small group that actually wanted that Castillo be free, and Castillo and Betsy Chavez and all these political, these persons who had been got into jail or into prison by Boluarte's government. But even though many people were interested in pointing this demand as a minority thing, I would say it was majoritarian. But now that's clear. That's not something that can be contested anymore. It's obvious. I mean, I should have take the pictures to show you from the protest of the June of July 19th. That everywhere, Castillo was everywhere, everywhere. Like
You know
on the
what's
streets
funny?
of. Hmm?
The international left sources that we follow that are usually very good with other stuff. When you look at the list of demands that they list for why people have hit the streets again, the reinstatement of Castillo is removed.
Yeah,
It's
they
no
removed it
longer.
because they hate him. But it's again, it's a class thing.
Right.
It's amazing. They hate him. They hate him almost as much. I mean, when Castillo was couped, even I got with some of my close friends who are, we have a lot of disagreements, but they consider themselves, many of them, Marxists. And I don't know, we were talking, and one of them or a couple of them were like, no, but I mean, let's forget about Castillo, right? Because yeah, they should free him and whatever, but they can't. No, he's not important anymore for this process, right? Like, and I was like, but who should lead this process once it starts again? Who do you think should lead it? And they were like, I don't know, somebody will appear. Somebody will appear just as Castillo appeared, right? Like he came out of nothing. Some other regional leftist leader will appear. And to me, it was obvious that the only person right now who can lead this thing. I mean, of course, I want Lenin to come from heaven and take the leadership of this process, but I mean, I'm an atheist, so it's impossible. And so I think it must be Castillo. It must be Castillo. He's the one we had right now, and the
And that's what the
people,
people want, right?
and that's what the people want. And they already in the polls, we already see that if tomorrow we got elections, the only candidate who would win by a majority would be him. so
Mm.
so yeah. And this process, and this is the most important thing. This process is not my process.
Mm.
It's a popular process. It's a popular process. It's for the people, and it's for the people who have been deprived of the rights historically, right? Of course, there have been some democratic wins through history with Velasco and with the universal suffrage, which we hadn't until the 80, right? 1980, that's when we got universal suffrage in Peru. Before, people who couldn't read and write couldn't vote. Surprise! Who are the people who can't read and write? Well, non-white people from outside of the coast, and and of course outside of Lima. But that's pretty hard to understand for even for so-called socialists who get mad because we talk about the take of Lima and whatever. So
I, I just wanted to pull this up real quick because this is an article that you did for us last year, and it kind of highlights something that you're hinting at now, which is you were talking about your friends, I'm guessing fellow academics, Marxists, but just completely ignoring the people, right, and the people's demands. And the title of the article, I think, captures the essence. Si una izquierda no es popular, no es revolucionaria. So if a left is not popular, it's not revolutionary. If you're not with the people, if you're just in a little corner with your, fellow intelligentsia friends, like, what are you doing? There's nothing revolutionary about that. You have to be with the masses. Um,
yeah.
but the protest, this new take of Lima, um, it's been going on since the 19th, so about a
Mhm.
week now, a little bit over a week. How has it been going? It's been a coalition basically of indigenous communities, peasant communities, trade unions, and some other progressive groups.
Yeah,
But
you
how
also
is it-
have liberals, like so-called center. They have because they. I mean, it's not because of the killings. We have more than 60 people killed by the police and the armed forces. It's not because of that. It's because I don't know. They are kind of tired from Congress, right? They're tired from. They are. It's this moral indignation. No? As I said, they see the Congress as a tasteless organ of government right now. So they have got into the streets after months. But I mean, in the end, it's a good thing, right? Because you have the protest was massive, massive. There were really, 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 really many people outside. Um, However, I would say this: it was strangely pacific, no? Like calm. There wasn't much repression. Of course, there was repression, but I mean, months ago. I mean, I'm not. Of course, I'm not saying this because I want repression, right? But it usually tells you something about how is it going. You had the police months ago shooting their gas, bombs directly to the face of people, most aggressive than I have seen them before in my life. And even though you could say it was a success because of the quantity of people, it I would say it even was festive, right? There was some joy in the air, but it was not combative. Again, not that I want confrontation or whatever, but it can become symbolic, right? So, but then I don't know. Some of the protesters actually got very near the Congress, but it said I've heard. I'm not sure about this, but I've heard there was a video circulating that showed that this police how do you say when the police gets this kind of el cerco, no, el cerco policial. Mm, like the police cordon, right? The police cordon.
right?
They put this police cordon so people can't get into the Congress, and it was breached, right? And those were the people who were repressed. They say that they had like police in civilian outfits that who were the ones who actually removed the cordon and got the people near the Congress. So I don't know. I really can't say right now what was the impact of 19th. Even though numerically, just numerically, it might be seen as a success, right? I think people was just cheerful. The fact that they saw so many people outside, that they felt that there was this massive convocation, right? But afterwards, we have had some, like, repression is getting bigger again, and it's supposed to be, we have a march, no, like a protest tomorrow. Tomorrow is 28th, and the 28th is as I was talking to you before, the Independence Day in Peru. So it might be important, but we don't know, because uh, the fact is that Lima in the end is mostly, no, the protesters in Lima are mostly middle class privileged people, and they might go to the festivities, the beach or whatever. Lima is a coast, city, so I don't know. So we will see what kind of support the delegations have. But I do know one thing: there's no chance that it will be like some sort of stabilization in the, no, in the long run, for a liberal democracy and institutional order that we have right now. It's impossible. It's full of breaches, and crisis is like imminent right now. It's the system designed, institutionally designed right now. It's impossible to get out of this hole. So I do hope that in the short run we get to a solution, to a popular solution. But this, in the meantime, this state of crisis and protests, it will keep going. I don't know for how long. Even if this wave, dies out, in a few months you'll have another one and another one and another one. So
That's very interesting to hear you say that, because I'm wondering, and maybe my head's going to the wrong place, whether like the lack of repression coincides with the increase in the more PMC, middle class liberal sectors getting involved in the protest. Before it was just the underclass of indigenous people, and those
definitely
people the police could beat. But once you have, the people that
privileged
the
people.
children of the Limeans hang out with, then it's a little more different. But I did want to put up a couple of videos from Twitter of instances of repression, and in both cases, it was indigenous women that
Yeah.
were affected. So this is a video of a policeman taking off the anti-gas mask that a protester had on. And again, one of the things that has been mentioned was the very extensive use of tear gas with the protesters. So let me do a little bit of zooming in on this. It could be seen better. So that was the actual police officer, and then the second video that I wanted to see, that I wanted to show, was them knocking an indigenous woman down. Let me play this from the start.
Yeah, that's 22.
What was that?
22, June
Yeah.
22. Do you understand what he says, the police?
Yeah, they're saying back up.
No, yeah,
Retrocede.
but saying back up, I'm talking to you nicely, he's saying. Right?
The what?
I'm talking to you nicely, right? Back up.
Oh, yeah, because he's throwing an amigo in there. Is that
Yeah,
part
yeah,
of the?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You see the lady on the floor here. I don't know if she
Yeah,
was unconscious, but that's kind of what's inside.
yeah.
Sin embargo, intervienen. Y esto es lo que ocasiona.
Yeah,
And they're covering it with police shields too.
yeah. There are some other videos where you can actually see, but yeah, yeah. They took her down. They took her down. They didn't want people to help her. Yeah, yeah. But that's and since Boluarte's government, this is an everyday thing, right?
Would you say that it's specifically targeting of like the the popular classes,
Yeah, of course.
um, and instead of like the more liberal middle class elements that have been participating since the 19th in these protests?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that
Like, are you seeing any
especially
white guys with khaki shorts getting harassed? Please,
no, no,
I
no,
haven't seen
not
anything
with
like
khaki shorts, but
not with khaki, with jeans, skinny jeans or something.
but yeah, there was white people, of course. Yeah, there was. But and it's not that they don't get repressed. They do if they hang out with the protests. The protesting masses, they will be gassed and they may even be hit. But of course, you have the a larger chance of being repressed if you're not white. That's the thing. And of course, in an I would say in a normal situation, people who come from the country, people who come from outside of Lima, from especially from the Andean region, because you have the coast, right? And the coast, even though it's not Lima, but it's more Creole, right? Like more westernized in the end. But the Andean region, and of course the Amazonic region, they are it's almost like a normal thing to repress people. And I mean, in some of the governments we had before Castillo, and I'm talking about the post Fujimori era, right? Uh, this corridor in the Andean South, what we call el Corredor Sierra Sur. It's with a lot of mining, and a very big peasant population. It wasn't in a state of emergency for almost all of those periods of government, right? Like 3 years or so, or in each government, right? So I don't know. At least with Kuczynski, you had that, and I think with Vizcarra, too, who is very much loved by a sector of the center, so-called center. So yeah, that's a normal thing. It's just that when you get into this kind of political crisis, in this kind of not normal or abnormal. I don't know if abnormal is the word, but when what is normal outside of Lima gets into Lima, yeah, it can suck also white progressives, right? But the thing is what I said, right? The chance is much bigger, and also because of the participation, and also because of who is that's important. Who is at the vanguard of the protest, right? And it usually, right now, they are the popular organizations. Of course, for pictures, you have groups of Nuevo Peru or even Peru Libre or whatever, but popular organizations, and those are the ones who are most at risk. Also, the what we call las brigadas, like the brigades, who are the ones who disarm bombs, like the gas, like the tear gas, and the ones who get with the shields and try to shield people around, and medical brigades. Well, the police disarms. I don't know. They take a lot of the time the tools of these kids, because they are mostly young people, right? And I would say not privileged, young people. So I would say middle and lower most of the time. And these kids, they get their masks robbed by the police, and they take their tools thrown into, I don't know, the garbage, and they are directly repressed. And also we have in the press, when in the media, when police officers get into the media, and I mean the of course the official media, Limian media, when they got into the police officers get into these programs, and they talk about the brigades, and they talk about the tools for disarming tear gas bombs, and the masks, the anti-gas masks. It's almost like they are expecting, and I'm talking about the journalists, it's almost like they were expecting that people shouldn't use anti-gas masks in protests. Why do they have that? And they shouldn't have this kind of disarming tools. Why? Are they terrorists? Why do they need that? Well, if they are like peaceful protesters, why do they need those things? Shields, so dangerous. So that's kind of like the general attitude right now. But and it's always this like this boogeyman, the terrorist, right? That right now, and it's funny because it's not effective anymore. For years after Sendero Luminoso, we have especially in the coast, especially in Lima, not only in Lima, of course, but especially there, which funny enough is the region which was less affected by the war between the military and Sendero. And they
The
are
shining path, by the way. Yeah,
what?
the shining path.
Yeah, the Shining Path. Yeah,
Yeah.
Sendero. Um, they live in fear of this terror, no, the figure, the abstract figure of a terrorist. And the terrorist could be anything. I would say that mostly terrorist means non-white and peasant, but it could mean anything in the end. But it's mostly the terrorists right now in the press are the people who come to Lima, the delegations, no, those people who are talking about taking Lima, no, those are terrorists, right? So yeah, again, no, it shows how this anti-communist, anti-classist perspective articulates, with a racial thing in Peru, a racial thing in Peru. But the thing is that it's become so lightly used, the category of a terrorist, that everybody who is against Dina Boluarte right now, who even though has a high disapproval percentage, is very much approved by the big capitals in Peru. We know, and no, people who participate in no, the heads of big enterprises in Peru, they love her. You can see that in the polls. Boluarte's approval comes from that sector, right? So even though, no, even though I forgot what I was saying, but the thing is that right now, using as lightly as they're using this terrorist thing, the category, people have started even the right wing people in the press who usually bought that thing, who usually, they supported that kind of discourse. Even they right now are like, yeah, but aren't you exaggerating a bit? That maybe that they are not terrorists because of that. But which is a good sign, right? Because it's like the I don't know, the slight amount of hegemony that they had, they are losing it. And that's always bad for a government. A government, no matter how conservative or even fascistic, it can't stand only on repression. That's a recipe for failure, I think. But even though that's the thing, even that so that's the what's happening right now with this discourse. The police, I don't know, they are kind of and especially the police, even more than the military, they are like emboldened, right? They are like emboldened because you have this, and I know that this is. I saw somebody wrote something, but I got distracted and didn't read it. Could you tell me what did it say? Please tell us. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. What I was saying is that they're emboldened, and even though this thing, you have this thing that exists in most countries right now. I think that this discourse that comes from the police and from conservatives of like, yeah, but criminals can do anything. They can shoot everybody. They are no they are like these monsters that can do anything. And why does police have so many restrictions? Liberals shouldn't put these kind of restrictions on the police. And I don't know. There's this kind of resentment in the police. That is also a class thing because at least I don't know how it is in the U.S., but at least in Peru, most of and this is a cruel paradox, right? That most of the police force come from the lower classes, from the popular classes, right?
That's been
But
historically true here because the police force here was rooted in the slave catchers of the
yeah,
antebellum
yeah,
period,
of course,
which they would get the
yeah,
poor whites to do, and that would feed into, Du Bois said, it would feed into their vanity, and it would allow them to have some semblance of association with the white
yeah.
planter instead of like seeing their commonality with the black proletariat. So, yeah,
Mm,
very much like that here.
yeah. Yeah, but it has it's a specificity, right? It's not exactly the same. It has commonalities, but the thing is, yeah, the police force actually usually comes from popular classes here, and as in other places. And the thing is that they see this liberal discourse of rights, of human rights, and restrictions to the police and restrictions to police force. They see it sees some kind of resentment, I would say, right? Like these privileged people telling us that we, and they kind of allow crime to go rampant. And I think that one of the things that Boluarte has done, and Otárola, her prime minister, who is also a former left guy, for ironically. Of course. By the way, many people in the right still say, whenever they can, that Boluarte and Otárola are left wing, right? That they are not one of theirs. That if they don't like Boluarte, they shouldn't have voted for Castillo because Boluarte was her prime minister and whatever, right? But going back to what I was saying, I think you have this thing boiling, and Boluarte and Otárola, they have used it like that, like they have go like, you can do anything, no, you can do anything, just hit them, kill them, not take their masks away, shoot them with the tear gas. I don't care. Just do anything. We will use whatever we can to talk about the heroism of the police force right now against this terroristic, monstrous, barbaric aggression from the south, right? So this is this irrational mass that doesn't understand that the president can do anything right now, right? Who are, according to Boluarte, they're a minority, right? Like a small number of violent radicals. So yeah, the police is really, really, really emboldened by that, right? They and I would say they enjoy it, which takes us into another field and to psychology and Marxist psychology, I would say, right? And but uh, but there is there is this kind of release, that has been building up, and it in the end relates to the inherent contradictions again of liberal democracy, no, and its formalistic approach to rights, and its negation of structural causes of crime, and I don't know. No, it's always the same. No, it always amounts to the same.
It's very interesting. You mentioned there that part of this emboldening of the police force is rooted in Boluarte, making it seem as if it's a minority of people that are protesting against her. And I wanted to pull up this graph that sort of segue us into the end of the conversation. We kind of been going on for about an hour and a half. But these are the numbers that are asking for Dina Boluarte to quit. These are the numbers that are asking for the closure of the Congress, and these are the numbers calling for a constituent assembly. So 78% of the people are calling for the coup president to quit. 77 are calling for the closure of the Congress, and 69 are calling for a constituent assembly. And there's a statistics that should be here, but it's not. And you pointed me to the reason why. But considering these numbers, like where do you see Peru heading in the near future, and then in the not so near, a little bit more distant future?
I didn't heard your question, Carlos, because the internet, I think it's failing a bit.
Oh, that considering the numbers and how they look in terms of the massive disapproval ratings of Boluarte, the Congress, and the demands for a constituent assembly. Where do you see Peru going in not just the near future, but in the not so near future?
In the near future, I don't know. Yeah, I really, I actually right now, I really don't see it. What I would say, I guess, I don't think Boluarte can. She won't finish. The 4 years that she's supposed to do.
Surprise, surprise! Another Peruvian
No,
president doesn't.
I can't see her right now. I don't know. Maybe she will. Maybe I'm wrong, but I can't. I actually can't see her. And the right wing, of course, and the bourgeoisie, they will use that in their favor, right? Like another, because they have this narrative of yeah, disaster. Even the liberals at the center, right? And even many people in Nuevo Peru, they have this narrative of how how much of a disaster Castillo's government was, and that all of this crisis is Castillo's fault, and many people within that narrative, and they will use Dina Boluarte as an excuse to feed that narrative, right? Because Dina Boluarte is like another, like consequence of Castillo's uh, winning the elections, right? So, and it's amazing, this this sort of blindness to the fact that you won't solve this with a right political candidate. They kind of, that's what's behind that narrative, right? That it would all be good if we had somebody with the credentials who has studied, I don't know, economy, whatever, wherever, in Stanford or whatever, right? So yeah, I do think she will be sooner than later ousted. Otarla too. They may even go to prison. It will take maybe some months, maybe a year. I don't know, but they will be out sooner or later before the mandate finishes. And I would say this. I mean, I don't know if Castillo will be reinstated. I hope so, but but even if he doesn't, and even though he's not the better, I don't know, the best leader that we could have. I like very much. I don't know. I'm a little bit of a geek myself. I like this Christopher Nolan's Batman movies, and there's this quote. No, not the hero we deserve, but the hero we need. I like to use that for Castillo right now. So even though he's not the hero we deserve, but the hero we need, he's becoming a symbol right now, and that has because a friend of mine, and she's an anthropologist. He's actually French, but he's very much Peruvianized. She lives in Cusco since many years ago, and she's very close to indigenous and women organizations in Cusco. She said to me something like, and I think you mentioned Lo Zurdo. This is a very Lo Zurdian perspective. She said to me something like, yeah, Castillo doesn't identify himself as indigenous. And to people who understand, for example, race as something that deals with identity, he doesn't identify himself as indigenous. He doesn't speak Quechua. He doesn't speak Aymara. He only speaks Spanish. I don't know. He's not what is usually from a purely theoretical, liberal, or anthropological, or whatever conception of what's indigenous. He's not indigenous in that sense. But Castillo right now, that's what she told me, and I think this is a really lucid way of seeing things. Right now in Peru, Castillo is the most. He kind of incarnates indigenousness right now, because people see him. They see how he has been abused. They see how he has been abused by the press, by the media, by the elites, the bourgeoisie, the Congress, the political left-wing organizations that went with him into power. They have seen him being mistreated, like I won't say exploited, but in a sort of way, that too, right? So for people in Peru, I don't know, being indigenous is an experience, and it's an experience of oppression, it's an experience of exploitation, and it's an experience of struggle, right? And Castillo incarnates that right now, that experience, that inheritance, right? That kind of social, collective, historical memory of which I would say it's a class memory, and that's why he's becoming a symbol, and that's why also because he was the only leader back then that actually was democratic enough, right, to speak with them face to face, right? But also because of this kind of identification of the people with him, and that is really important, right now. That has a tremendous impact in politics right now. I think it will be. I think it marks a before and after right now in politics here, because this is not a social movement in the sense that they don't have demands of recognition or just that. It's a political movement. It's politicized. They want a radical institutional change. That's not synonymous with socialism. Maybe it's not enough for certain Marxists, but I would say it's what practice shows right now, and what we have learned, in Marxism in the third world, is that we need this democratic revolution, and they will. I don't think that people will stop until they get it. No, they won't, because the foundations of the system we have right now, institutional system. I'm not talking. I mean, I would love to be talking about capitalism in general, but this institutional order that we have right now, it's falling to pieces, because it is. And Congress it's insane. They think they really think they can actually, I don't know, like stop the crisis with laws. like banning Castillo from the presidency and banning whatever leader appears, and it's just not enough. It's falling to pieces, and because it negates the existence of economic structures. It negates the existence of social and cultural structures of power, of dynamics that go outside what the state can or can't do within the limits of a liberal democracy. So I don't know that those boundaries they can't resist what's happening right now, and and I mean unless they get every single Peruvian into prison, no, or kill the majority of the population, I don't think they will be able to resist it. So in the long run, I think that's what's coming. I hope so.
Yeah, and I agree with your sentiment that view of things from your friend is incredibly lucid. And as you said earlier, um, no order, regardless of how fascistic and based in the most terroristic elements of finance capital, repressing the people, and it can't continue without consent. It can't continue without having at least a certain amount of hegemony. And what we're seeing is the crumbling of that, and simultaneously any attempts at reforming our way through it being completely squashed with Castillo, which was an attempt to kind of reform our way through it. And it does leave only one option for the people, a more radical social transformation. So I think that's a very fair and likely insight if you're weighing things objectively. Um, we have one quick question from the audience that was asked earlier that it's a little bit disconnected from the specific topic of the protest, but I think it'll be helpful for Americans. Um, we need critical thinking. As I have a question: do many people in Peru think that the USA does shenanigans to their election in multiple ways? So, how does how do Peruvians see the role of the U.S. Empire in what's going on right now?
In the elections,
Hmm.
I mean, I wouldn't say there what we were or many people was under the impression that the U.S. got into the elections, but many of us, especially I would say people of more of a left wing radical position, or people from more popular no, like stratus, straight strata. I don't know how to say it. But in those sectors, there's a suspicion, and I think it's reasonable, that there was um, an intervention of the U.S. in the Coup of Castillo, and that they talked with Boluarte, and the Congress has been moving a lot to put again resources into the hands of the usual suspects, and so yeah, I would say that there has been an involvement of the U.S. in all of this, and we also have this ambassador of the U.S. right now. I don't remember her name, but she's a former CIA agent. I don't know if you knew that. And by the way, there are these polemics because no, Peru, as I said before, is a very much linked to NGOs, and a few months ago we got this picture of one of Nuevo Peru's representatives with she's a trans woman, Gaela, she's called. I don't remember. Gaela Cari, indigenous and trans, and she took a picture with she's her ONG and the ambassador, and I don't know. It's that it's a. I'm mentioning this because it's not only that they have talked with Boluarte, and of course they've been. I'm sure they've been in some measure behind Castillo's coup, because no, also because I think they might have, the US might have gave a chance to a certain degree to Castillo. They wanted to see what would happen, you know? But the unrest and the, I don't know, unstableness of his government, and I think they might have, and also the fact that he was pressed by his voters, the population, might have in the end convinced the US that he wasn't the person they needed in charge, and they needed somebody they could trust to persecute a neoliberal line of thought. But I was mentioning Gaela Kari because even some of the persons who right now are criticizing Boluarte and are part of the left, and I'm sure this is not just Nuevo Peru, even though it's usually that region of the left wing map, right? Uh, Through the ONGs and through academia and through all of those institutions and networks mentioned by Gabriel Rock, who was in this program. You know, he's been here more than once, right?
Yeah, he's been here a few times, and I like a concept that ties it together, which is one of the groups here in the U.S. Marxist group that broke off from DSA is the
Mm.
Iron Triangle of the media, academia, and the NGOs. 'Cause I
Okay.
think those are the institutional sources where a lot of this stuff trickles
Yeah.
down then into organizational spaces.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So through this iron triangle, as Rocky calls it, you have many sectors of the left who are also who are right now in the opposition, or are playing to the opposition or whatever, who are also in some sort of way connected, more or less directly, more or less willingly, or knowingly, or with consciousness of being like this, no, with the U.S. embassy. Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's Latin America, or the U.S. Is here, like, rooted in the institutional design, even of countries that are trying to do something against this, like Venezuela or Bolivia. Even though Bolivians have done something marvelous, that they expelled the ONGs from from Bolivia. That's amazing. We were really dreaming that Castillo do something like that. He didn't. But I don't know. I hope if he's reinstated, and I hope so. I really do hope that too, that he takes a more radical position after all of this, right? It would be crazy if he gets reinstated. It would be right now. A few months ago, many people were like, "No, that's impossible, absolutely impossible." Right now, it seems more plausible, but even I can imagine what would happen if he was. No,
Well,
like,
it seems like he can't. If he comes back, he wouldn't be able to go back to the approach that he had, where it was like, let's try to see where compromise gets us. It's
no,
almost as if the lack of the bourgeoisie to give him the compromises necessary is forcing him, if he comes back, to have to by necessity take more radical positions. But
yeah,
well,
it's like, I mean, it's like something you mentioned before, right? That it's like that. It's a sort of learning that people have, right? That, like, right now we have some demands, and they are not Marxist or socialist demands, but they are democratic, necessary demands. And more repression and more the resistance from the bourgeoisie and from the government, and people radicalize necessarily. They do. You know, let's hope Castillo radicalizes too, if it gets to. I mean, he will have to see, as you say, that the approach he's been having before, it won't serve him, because I think Castillo was very, even though he was really don't want to say paranoid, but he didn't trust many people around him. But I think he underestimated how much they hated him, the elites, how much they rejected him, and how much all that has come after has been, there's this kind of need to educate the masses and to show them that they can put somebody like Castillo in power, right? So I don't know. Let's hope if he does get reinstated, there's some sort of learning, and that other approaches are put in motion.
Absolutely, brother. I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much for such an insightful conversation. I've learned a lot from you, and you've made me rethink some of the usual sources that we go to as people outside of Peru to hear about leftist politics over there. Is there anything you'd like to plug before we go?
No. I'm just to thank you again for inviting me. I'm sorry, my English is very rusty right now. I haven't spoken English in months, but thank you a lot, and let's keep in touch.
Absolutely. Stay on after, but thank you so much for coming on again, Sebastian, and thank you to all who watched. And we'll go out in the same style that we came in with the international. See you all.
Injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.